Hey guys, welcome to the first video for Chapter 22 with nationalism in Europe. We talked back in Chapter 20 about how nationalist movements were building throughout Europe ever since the days of Napoleon and his wars. Some nationalist movements were for independence, like when groups wanted independence from larger empires, like remember we talked about Greece wanting independence from the Ottoman Empire, but other nationalist movements were about unifying. The first part of this chapter will be discussing one of these unifying movements with the creation of a new Germany. It's very important to remember that in the year 1800, there was no country called Germany. Germany was a series of states, and you had local loyalties to them. All right, so here's Germany today. Okay, these are the modern borders of Germany. You got Poland over here, Belgium and the Netherlands, Czech Republic, and so forth. This is what Germany looked like in 1815. It was a really bit of a mess, right? It was like this patchwork of different states. You had Bavaria, you had Westphalia, you had Hanover. And if you were from there, that's who you were loyal to. They spoke the same language. You had very similar cultures, but the people there didn't view themselves as being a United Nations. Or a United Nation, rather. It was called the German Confederation, and you can kind of make it out over here, right, by the lines. This is a bit of a confusing map to read, granted, but they were held together loosely by this weak alliance, and it was weak. That's important to remember. Okay, the German Confederation was a weak alliance. Because a confederation is not a united country necessarily with a strong central government. It's an alliance of independent states. And the strongest of these states was Prussia. Over here, you see you got West Prussia and East Prussia. Okay, so Prussia was the most powerful. Now, Prussia can be a confusing concept because it sounds like Russia, but it has nothing to do with it. You think, oh, it's right next to Russia. So is that like a form of it? No. All right. It's got very, very old origin. But the important thing to remember, Prussia is German. Oh, boy. Shoot. Let me go back to that. Prussia is German. All right. Just because it sounds like Russia, do not get confused with this. It was a German state. And it was a state from which the modern German nation would emerge. And the main reason why was one man, Otto von Bismarck. Right, here you see him wearing the traditional helmet of the Prussian military. He was a Prussian noble. He was of the upper class there, the upper wealthy landowning class. And that meant that he was conservative, right? The wealthy landowners tend to be conservative because they're wealthy and they want things to stay the way they are. Now, he quickly rose up the ranks and in 1862 became Prime Minister of Prussia. And 9 years after that, the King of Prussia, because Prussia was a monarchy, made him Chancellor. Chancellor is the highest official aside from the king. So he really was the power behind the throne. He was not a monarch himself, but he was the guy telling the king what to do. The king gave him a tremendous amount of leeway in terms of creating government policies. So he really was the architect of everything happening first in Prussia and then later in Germany when it would become united. Now, he followed a policy called Realpolitik. Realpolitik means realistic policies based on the needs of the people. Essentially, you base your decisions as a leader on whatever the people want the most. Staying in power is more important than sticking to your hardcore principles or beliefs. He used Realpolitik to unite the German states, and he outlined this plan in a famous speech where he coined the phrase blood and iron. Let me show you a quote from this with me. Germany does not look to Prussia's liberalism, right? Remember talking about liberalism in the previous chapter, but to her power. The great questions of the day are not to be decided by speeches and majority resolutions. Resolutions are decisions in government. That was the mistake of 1848. Remember, 1848 was the year of all those revolutions. He says, that's not how our destiny is going to be decided. It will be decided by blood and iron. He said blood and iron would unite Germany. The iron refers to industrialization. The blood refers to warfare. Okay, so iron, industrialization, blood, warfare. We already know from chapter 21 that Germany was one of the first nations to industrialize after Great Britain, so that covers the iron part of it. Now Bismarck needs the blood, and that will come with war. And so war is going to strengthen Germany. The old saying, war, what is it good for? Well, politically, war can be very useful. It can unite a people against common enemies. And if you win, it builds up your esteem. It can be a nationalist tool. Now, if you want to go to war, you first need to build up the army. And by the late 1800s, the Germans had a very powerful army. Bismarck put much of Prussia's money into its army, and he used the new industrial technology into making a modernized army with machine guns and battleships and things like that. His next step was to use this new army in a series of wars. First with Denmark and Austria. So you think Denmark, why would they fight there? Well, that was because he wanted lands. They annexed German lands. Right, the Prussian territory, the light yellow over here, right, here's Prussia, and then the territory annexed by Prussia. Here's Denmark. These areas through here, including Hanover and this down here, the Hesse Castle, they were annexed. So this now becomes a part of Prussia, right? Annex means to take over, to add on to. Now, this war with Denmark was very quick, and this is where Bismarck can show his, real politic ways, but also a ruthless side to him. Austria, which is down here, was actually an ally of Prussia during the war with Denmark, right? Austria and Germany are very, very close ethnically and so forth. But soon afterwards, Bismarck invented an excuse to attack Austria. So now they are going against them. And again, this was a very quick battle. Prussia's modern military easily defeated Austria, and this resulted in more lands for them. And it also resulted in the disbanding of the German Confederation. Prussia was now the dominant state in Central Europe, although Bismarck still had a score to settle with their old rival, the French, right, with the Franco-Prussian War. This was a result of the growing rivalry between the two nations. Germany had disliked the French ever since Napoleon's invasion a few decades before, and Bismarck eventually manipulated facts that resulted in Napoleon III. Remember, we discussed back in chapter 20 how he was the original Napoleon's nephew and had declared himself emperor. He manipulated Napoleon into actually declaring war on Prussia. So, this was a war that Bismarck wanted, but he got it so that France declared war on them, which made it even easier for him to get the German states behind him. Bismarck, he goaded him into a war, and then he just crushed them. France was humiliated. You have a very famous painting here. This is after the Battle of Sedan, where this is Napoleon. Here, this is Bismarck. Napoleon was captured by the Prussian forces, which essentially brought an end to the Second Empire of France. But it was very humiliating, not only for France, but obviously personally for Napoleon. But what this did was it brought everybody onto Team Prussia within the German states. They said, Bismarck is our guy. He's leading us to greatness and victory. And so what comes next is the birth of the German Empire. So emboldened by their growing military strength and victories at war, the princes of Germany agreed to unite. Right? So now, right, this was the original Prussian territory, all these German states like Bavaria and Wurt and so forth, and this red outline, it's the boundary of a German empire. And they convinced William, or Wilhelm as he was called in German, of Prussia, to take a title, the Kaiser. Kaiser means emperor. Right, modeled after Caesar, the title for the old Roman emperors. So it was a Germanification of it. Caesar becomes Kaiser. And in 1871, they created the Second Reich, or Empire. The First Reich was the Holy Roman Empire. This was the second one. The third one we'll talk about in World War II with the Nazis. And they built a government that had a two-house legislator. Actually, before I get to that, sorry, I was out of placement here. This is the official coronation of William. You see that's him here. But you notice who's kind of front and center within the picture. It's not William. It's this dude in white right here. And who do you think that is? That is Bismarck. So the artist of this one very clearly showed that even though the coronation is about William, who's the guy that's really, calling the shots here? Who's the guy that's really, making all of the decisions? But in any event, this two-house legislator was established. Now, remember, legislator makes laws. Like our Congress. Congress is our legislative branch. And two houses the way that we do. We have a Senate and a House of Representatives. They made an upper house, and that was chosen by the German states, by the princes, and a lower house that was elected by universal male suffrage. But because the upper house could veto, block decisions of the lower house, real power remained with the Kaiser and the Chancellor. So the German Empire was not a democracy. That's important to remember. So that is an overview about how Germany comes to be, how a series of disjointed states become a unified Germany. And then in the next section, we will talk about how Bismarck continued to expand German power.